Welcome. Tonight, we are stepping into a warm, firelit parlor in a modest New England house, in the middle of a long, hard winter. The wind is howling outside, but inside, there is the sound of laughter, the murmur of voices, and the quiet, unshakable strength of a family bound together by love. This is a story about four sisters. Four very different, very real, and very wonderful young women, who are trying to find their way in a world that demands so much of them, and gives so little in return. We are opening Little Women, the beloved, timeless, and deeply human masterpiece of Louisa May Alcott. Louisa May Alcott was not writing fantasy. She was writing her own life. She grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, in a family that was brilliant, idealistic, and perpetually poor. Her father, Bronson Alcott, was a philosopher and a dreamer, a man of grand ideas and very little practical sense. The burden of keeping the family afloat fell on Louisa and her mother. She worked as a seamstress, a teacher, and a governess, always dreaming of becoming a writer. When a publisher asked her to write a book for girls, she was not enthusiastic. She called such books moral pap. But she needed the money. And so, she sat down and wrote, from the deepest well of her own experience, the story of the March family. She was the model for Jo, the fiery, ambitious, and fiercely independent second sister. Her own beloved and gentle sister, Lizzie, who died young, became Beth. The book was published in 2 volumes, in 1868 and 1869, and it was an immediate, overwhelming, and totally unexpected success. It made Louisa May Alcott famous and, for the first time in her life, financially secure. The story is set during the American Civil War. Mr. March, the father of the family, is away, serving as a chaplain for the Union Army. This leaves his wife, Margaret, known affectionately as Marmee, and their 4 daughters to fend for themselves. Money is scarce. The war has made everything harder. But the March family is rich in the things that truly matter. They are rich in love, in creativity, in a deep sense of duty to one another, and in the quiet, unshakable strength of their mother. They are not saints. They are real, flawed, and wonderfully human young women, each struggling with her own particular demons, and each trying, in her own way, to be good. This is the little story of their little lives, and yet, it is a story that has resonated across the centuries, because it is a story about the biggest things of all: love, loss, duty, ambition, and the beautiful, painful, and transformative power of family. Part 1, Jo, Meg, Beth, and Amy, A Christmas Without Presents. The story begins with a complaint. "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents," grumbles Jo March, lying on the hearth rug, her chin in her hands. She is the second of the 4 March sisters, and she is a force of nature. She is a tomboy, all long legs and restless energy, with a fierce, frowning face that hides a heart of pure gold. She wants to be a writer. She wants to be a hero. She wants to fight dragons, or at the very least, to escape the suffocating confines of being a girl. Her older sister, Meg, is the beauty of the family. She is gentle, pretty, and possesses a quiet, aching longing for the fine things she has never had. Then there is Beth, the third sister, a shy, gentle creature who finds her voice not in words, but in music. She is the peacemaker, the soul of the house, the one who is too good for this world. And finally, there is Amy, the youngest, a little artist with golden curls and a healthy dose of vanity. She is spoiled, willful, and utterly charming. It is Christmas Eve, and they are all feeling the pinch of poverty. Their mother, Marmee, enters with a letter. It is from their father, far away on the battlefield. He writes of his love, his longing for home, and his hopes for his daughters. He tells them to be good, to be brave, to fight their own private battles against their own faults. The letter is a call to arms, a gentle, powerful reminder that the most important battles are not fought with swords and guns, but within the quiet chambers of the human heart. The girls are moved. They resolve to be better. They will not be selfish. They will not be vain. They will, in their own small ways, be heroes. The next morning, Christmas morning, they are given a beautiful gift. Each girl receives a single book, and they are allowed to spend the day as they wish. Instead of buying presents for themselves, they decide to use their own small savings to buy gifts for their mother. It is a small sacrifice, but it is theirs, and it fills them with a warmth that no amount of money could buy. Their Christmas becomes something truly memorable when Marmee receives a request from a poor, starving family, the Hummels. A woman and her children are freezing and hungry in a cold, bare shack. Without hesitation, Marmee and the girls gather their own simple breakfast: fresh bread, milk, and butter, and carry it through the snow to the suffering family. It is a scene of pure, unadorned charity. They are not giving from their abundance, they are giving from their own need. This act of selfless kindness does not go unnoticed. Their wealthy, gruff, and mysterious neighbor, Mr. Lawrence, hears of their good deed. He is a man who has walled himself off from the world, living alone in his grand house with only his grandson and his memories. But the sight of 4 little women carrying their own breakfast to the poor melts his old, frozen heart. That evening, the March family receives a magnificent, unexpected gift, a feast of ice cream, cake, and beautiful flowers, a reward from their reclusive neighbor. It is their first, quiet introduction to the household that will change their lives forever. Part 2, The Friendship with the Lawrences and the First Trials. The Lawrence house next door was a place of mystery. It was a grand, stately mansion, the finest in the neighborhood, yet it seemed to hold a great deal of silence and sadness within its stone walls. The old gentleman, Mr. Lawrence, was known to be wealthy, proud, and utterly unapproachable. His grandson, a boy named Theodore, whom everyone called Laurie, was a lonely, restless young man, trapped between the cold formality of his grandfather's world and his own burning desire for warmth, friendship, and a little bit of chaos. It was Jo, with her fearless, unguarded nature, who finally broke through the wall. During a New Year's Eve party at the neighbor's house, she found Laurie hiding in a corner, looking miserable. Instead of ignoring him, she walked straight up to him and said, "I'm afraid you're not very well. Would you like to tell me what's the matter?" The ice was broken. An alliance was formed. Laurie became, in many ways, the 5th member of the March family. He was the brother they had never had. He was brought into their warm, chaotic, and creative circle, and he blossomed. He put on plays with them, joined their secret society, and shared their books, their jokes, and their dreams. For Jo, he was a kindred spirit, a fellow adventurer with a taste for mischief and a horror of polite society. For Laurie, the March household was a paradise. It was a place of warmth, laughter, and unconditional acceptance, a stark contrast to the quiet, orderly, and emotionally distant world of his grandfather. And slowly, tentatively, even old Mr. Lawrence began to soften. He saw the good influence the sisters were having on his grandson, and he was grateful. The friendship between Beth and old Mr. Lawrence was particularly tender. Beth, the shy, gentle musician, was terrified of the old man. But she was drawn to the magnificent grand piano in his house, a beautiful instrument that was never played. One day, after some quiet encouragement from Jo, Beth mustered all her courage and went to ask if she might play it. Mr. Lawrence, gruff but secretly pleased, agreed. From that day on, Beth would visit regularly, filling the silent house with music. The old man would sit in his study, listening to the beautiful, fragile melodies that floated through the halls, and his heart, which had been closed for so long, began to open. He gave Beth a small piano of her own, a gift that reduced the shy girl to tears of joy. It was a bond built not on words, but on a shared, unspoken love of beauty. But life, as always, was not just about good times. Each of the 4 sisters was fighting her own private battle. Meg, the eldest, was fighting against vanity. She was invited to a 2-week visit with a wealthy, fashionable friend, Annie Moffat. There, she was dressed up, made up, and paraded before the eligible young men. For a brief, intoxicating moment, she forgot who she was. She allowed herself to be called Daisy, to flirt, and to pretend she belonged to a world of luxury and ease. It was only when Laurie, who was also at the party, looked at her with a quiet, disappointed gaze that she realized she was not being herself. She was ashamed. She came home, and with tears in her eyes, confessed her folly to Marmee. The lesson was gentle but profound. A girl's true worth is not in her clothes or her beauty, but in her character. Jo was fighting a much fiercer dragon, her own temper. Amy, in a fit of rage after Jo excluded her from a trip to the theater, had done the unthinkable. She had found Jo's precious manuscript, a collection of fairy tales she had been working on for years, and she had burned it. The pain was absolute. Jo's words were the most precious things she possessed. They were her soul, her future, her escape. And Amy had destroyed them. The cold fury that followed was terrifying. Jo refused to speak to Amy. She treated her as if she were dead. It was only when Amy, heartbroken and seeking reconciliation, followed Jo and Laurie to the frozen river that the true cost of Jo's anger was revealed. Amy, trying to follow them across the ice, fell through a thin patch into the freezing water. The terror of nearly losing her sister finally shattered Jo's icy rage. She realized that her anger had almost cost a life. It was a lesson she would never forget. Part 3, Little Dramas, Great Sorrows. The idyllic rhythm of the March household was shattered by a quiet, creeping shadow. It began with a simple act of kindness. Marmee had received word of a poor, immigrant family, the Hummels, who were suffering terribly. The father had died, and now the mother and her children were sick with scarlet fever. Without hesitation, Marmee went to their aid, and Beth, the gentle, shy sister with the heart of a saint, insisted on going with her. The Hummel baby was dying, cradled in Beth's arms. It was a scene of profound, quiet sorrow. Beth did not flinch. She held the tiny, feverish creature, offering what comfort she could, while the other children cried and the mother wailed in a language no one else understood. The baby died. And Beth, in her quiet, selfless way, had absorbed the illness into herself. The first signs were subtle. A slight fever. A headache. A pale, listless tiredness that was not like the usual, gentle weariness of Beth. The local doctor, a kind, old man, was called. He examined Beth with a growing, grim concern. "I must inform you," he said to the family, "that Beth is suffering from scarlet fever." The words fell on the household like a sentence of doom. Suddenly, the warm, cozy home, which had always been a fortress against the world, felt like a prison. The younger, most vulnerable members of the family, Amy and Laurie, were sent away to stay with relatives, for fear of infection. Jo, who had recently recovered from a bout of illness herself, was allowed to stay and help. And so, the great, terrible battle for Beth's life began. The fever raged. For days, Beth lay in her bed, her small body burning, her face flushed, her mind wandering through a feverish dream. She no longer recognized her mother. She no longer recognized Jo. She was being pulled, slowly and terrifyingly, into a world beyond their reach. The days and nights blurred into a single, endless vigil. Marmee, the strong, serene mother, was a rock, but even a rock can crack under enough pressure. Jo, the fiery, restless sister, was a ghost of her former self. She moved through the house in a daze, speaking in whispers, her eyes red from weeping. She would sit by Beth's bed for hours, reading aloud from books that Beth could no longer hear, hoping that the sound of her voice would be an anchor, a line pulling her sister back from the abyss. The house, once filled with laughter and music, was now a tomb of silence, broken only by the shallow, labored breathing of the sick girl. It was a time of pure, primal terror. The family was facing the possibility of losing their heart. And for the first time, they understood how fragile their happiness truly was. The crisis came. The doctor's face was grim. The fever would not break. He spoke in a low, serious voice to Marmee, his words heavy with unspoken dread. The end, it seemed, was near. Jo, unable to bear it any longer, stumbled out of the house, her mind reeling. She ran through the falling snow to the Lawrence house, seeking comfort, or perhaps just a place to scream. Old Mr. Lawrence, who had grown to love Beth as a daughter, was struck with a terrible, cold fear. It was he who had the presence of mind to ask the question that would change everything. "Where is her father?" he demanded. A telegram was sent. A desperate, frantic telegram, begging Mr. March to come home at once. The word went out across the frozen miles. The family could only wait. And pray. And hope. And in the end, the crisis passed. The fever broke. Beth opened her eyes. She was weak, terribly weak, but she was alive. And when the thin, gray, and exhausted figure of her father finally appeared at the door, the house exploded into a storm of tears, laughter, and overwhelming relief. The worst was over. But the shadow of Beth's illness would linger, a quiet, lingering cold that would never quite go away. Part 4, Loves, Separations, and Dreams. The years were passing, and the little women were growing up. The childlike games gave way to the more serious business of the heart. Meg, the eldest and most traditionally beautiful of the sisters, had long been the object of quiet admiration. John Brooke, the modest, hard-working tutor of Laurie, had loved her from afar for months, a silent, steadfast devotion that he barely dared to voice. But the time for silence was over. One day, in the quiet warmth of the March parlor, he found Meg alone. With a mixture of fear and hope that touched her deeply, he confessed his love and asked for her hand. The proposal was not a grand, romantic gesture. It was simple, honest, and utterly sincere. He had little to offer but his love and his labor. But for Meg, who valued substance over show, it was enough. She said yes, with a quiet joy that lit up the whole house. The family was overjoyed, especially Jo, who, for a moment, forgot her own fears and celebrated her sister's happiness. But Jo, the restless, passionate sister, was not so easily claimed. She had always seen Laurie as her best friend, her brother, her fellow adventurer. She had never once considered him as a suitor. And so, when Laurie, his heart full of a love he had been nursing for years, finally confessed his feelings, Jo was thrown into a state of complete and utter turmoil. He was kneeling before her, his face full of a desperate, boyish hope, and he was offering her his whole world. And she could not give him what he wanted. She loved him, yes, but not in the way he loved her. To marry him would be to lock herself into a life of comfort and ease that would suffocate her. It would be to betray her own restless, ambitious soul. The refusal was the hardest thing she had ever done. She saw the light go out of his eyes, and her own heart broke with the pain she had caused. But she could not lie. She told him, with a trembling voice, that she could only ever love him as a brother. The words hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Laurie, shattered, could not bear to stay. He left the house, and soon after, left the country, fleeing to Europe to nurse his wounded heart. The bond between the two oldest friends was broken, perhaps forever. Jo, too, felt the need to escape. She decided to leave the familiar comforts of home and go to New York City. She would find work as a governess, and in her spare time, she would write. She would finally, truly, pursue her dream of becoming an author. It was a brave, and perhaps slightly reckless, decision. New York was a vast, overwhelming, and often lonely place. She took a room in a respectable boarding house, and began her new life. The work was hard, and the city was cold and indifferent. But Jo, with her fierce, stubborn spirit, refused to be cowed. She wrote story after story, sending them out to publishers, and collecting rejection slips like badges of honor. It was in the boarding house that she met a man who would change her life in a way she never expected. Professor Friedrich Baer. He was a German immigrant, a middle-aged intellectual, poor, kind, and utterly without pretense. He was not handsome. He was not glamorous. But he possessed a warmth, a wisdom, and a gentle, honest goodness that drew Jo to him. He became her friend, her mentor, and, in the quiet, unobtrusive way of true love, the keeper of her heart. Part 5, The Return Home and the Death of Beth. While Jo was building her new life in New York, a quiet tragedy was unfolding at home. Beth, the gentle, fragile sister, had never fully recovered from her bout with scarlet fever. The illness had left a lingering weakness in her chest, a slow, creeping cold that no amount of warmth could cure. She grew thinner, paler, more transparent. She moved through the house like a ghost, her sweet, quiet presence a constant reminder of what was slipping away. And then, the truth could no longer be denied. Beth was dying. The family, which had once been so full of life and laughter, was now a house of quiet, terrible sorrow. Jo, called home by an urgent letter, returned to find her sister waiting for her. The reunion was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beth was not afraid. She had made her peace. She spoke of death with a calm, serene certainty, as if she were speaking of a long journey to a beautiful, distant land. She asked Jo to stay with her, to hold her hand, and to help her through the final passage. Jo, her heart broken into 1,000 pieces, agreed. The two sisters spent their last days together in quiet, intimate conversation, preparing for the inevitable. And when the end came, Beth died peacefully, in her sleep, with Jo by her side. The soul of the March family was gone. The loss of Beth was a wound that never fully healed. It was the great, defining sorrow of the March family. But life, as it always does, went on. Amy, the youngest, had grown into a beautiful, accomplished, and surprisingly mature young woman. She had spent the last few years in Europe, traveling with her wealthy aunt, learning to paint, and absorbing the culture of the old world. It was there that she re-encountered Laurie, who had also been wandering the continent, trying to outrun his own heartbreak. They met, as adults, on the shores of a beautiful Swiss lake. The old childish dynamic was gone. In its place was a new, grown-up understanding, a shared history, and a quiet, unexpected affection. Laurie, who had once loved Jo with a boy's passion, found in Amy a different kind of love, a calmer, deeper, and more mature devotion. Amy, who had once been a spoiled child, had become a woman of grace, intelligence, and quiet strength. They fell in love, and they married. It was a happy ending, but one that was tinged with a certain irony. The boy Jo had rejected had found his peace with her sister. And so, the story of the March sisters came to its quiet, beautiful, and deeply satisfying conclusion. Jo, the restless, fiery writer, found her own happiness in a way that surprised even herself. Professor Baer, the kind, wise, and unassuming German scholar, returned to her life. He had come to visit her at the old March home, and in the quiet, familiar comfort of the orchard, he asked her to be his wife. It was not a dramatic, passionate declaration. It was a simple, honest proposal from a man who had loved her from the first moment he saw her, for who she truly was. And Jo, who had always insisted she would never marry, found herself saying yes. It was not the love of a young girl's fantasy. It was something far deeper, far more real, and far more lasting. She had found a partner, an equal, a soulmate. And together, they had a dream. Their dream was a school. A place where boys and girls could learn, not just from books, but from life. They transformed the old March home into a lively, chaotic, and loving schoolhouse. It was a place of laughter, learning, and endless activity. Meg and John Brooke, with their own small family, were frequent visitors. Amy and Laurie, now a celebrated artist and her devoted husband, returned from Europe, bringing with them their own brand of elegance and joy. And through it all, the spirit of Beth, the gentle, silent sister, remained. Her piano was still played, her songs were still sung, and her memory was a quiet, constant blessing on the family she had loved so deeply. The little women, who had begun their journey around a cold Christmas fire, had each found their own path, their own sorrows, and their own profound, hard-won happiness. They had grown up. They had become, in the truest sense of the word, little women, of great strength, great love, and great character. Louisa May Alcott wrote this book as a simple story for girls, but she gave the world something far greater. She gave us a portrait of a family that is real, flawed, and utterly lovable. She gave us Jo, the independent spirit who refused to be confined by the expectations of her time. She gave us Meg, who learned that love is worth more than wealth. She gave us Amy, who grew from a vain child into a generous woman. And she gave us Beth, the quiet saint whose brief life was a testament to the power of goodness. Little Women is not a story about grand adventures or great heroes. It is a story about the small, daily battles of ordinary life, and the extraordinary courage it takes to fight them with grace, humor, and love. It is a book that reminds us that the most important things in life are not the things we own, but the people we love and the souls we become. I am Melesias. This has been the story of Little Women, as I have understood it. Thank you for listening. If this warm and tender journey has touched your heart, please subscribe. And remember, the greatest wealth is found not in a bank, but in the quiet, unbreakable bonds of family and friendship. Until next time.